I believe that visual data is going to be the primary data type in construction relatively soon. Most things you do in construction require some sort of visual verification of it. Right? An awful lot of quality checks are visual in nature. Progress measurement, an awful lot of that is like visual in nature. Rather than like pulling up a checklist and clicking checklist buttons or filling out a form, I think you'll take a photograph or you'll shoot a quick video, or your phone has a LiDAR on it, and so you'll quickly grab a point cloud. And I think that's how we're going to document job sites. Because also behind the scenes there's growing capabilities of how that information can get processed without having to put human eyes on it.
Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah, and I'm a planning and scheduling manager for Intel.
My name's Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of a schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
And I'm Matt Craske. I'm the head of project controls for Google.
Today, we're going to get digital, and Matt is on the hot seat. Matt, you've been tasked with a digital-first approach for construction tools at a large GC. How do you go about doing it?
I've luckily had to tackle this problem a couple of times before, but I think I would actually do it in the absolute opposite order than how I've approached it previously. So I think like the traditional way of doing this would be to kind of map out all of your processes down to like an L4, like work out all your data structures and all the data you think you need, kind of write up requirements, select like tools based on kind of best in class, customize those tools to get them to do exactly what it is you want them to do, try to connect all those tools together and try to get them all to talk, quite often directly, and then kind of work out all of your databases behind the scenes, and work out what your business intelligence and reporting is going to look like. And I think the thing I've learned by doing that is that's really slow, it's really rigid, and you often end up with something pretty fragile at the end of it. Like it's really difficult to get that thing to evolve. Once you've done it, you're kind of stuck with it, and you end up with all the debt that kind of slows you down.
I'd also say describing it, and no offense to you, and hopefully it's pretty boring the way you described it. So if you were going to pitch that to somebody as like, this is the new wave, the digital first approach. All right. So what's the alternative method?
So I think I would actually start at kind of like the database BI level, right? And I think there you've really got like a few fundamental questions of what is going to be your cloud-based database, right? Are you going to go Azure Cosmos, or are you going to go like Google BigQuery? And both of those databases kind of come with like inherent BI solutions, right? If you're on Cosmos, you're probably using Power BI. If you're on BigQuery, you're probably going to go Looker Studio. I think the main reason I would start there is I think that's actually where like capabilities and functionality is going to be increasing the quickest. And I think we're going to see it kind of go through the roof over the coming years. And I think it might make some of the other decisions you would make basically obsolete, right? I think you have to have a data lake strategy these days. Like data warehouses are awesome, and I do think you need an element of a data warehouse. But I think you need to be just capturing all of your data, whether it's structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. You've just got to capture all of it. I think it avoids some tough decisions. Like, I don't think you actually have to know how your data is going to be structured and where it's going to be coming from. So you can kind of punt on some of those things. I think you can always build analytical tools to make sense of your data after the fact, rather than trying to have it all come in perfectly structured to begin with. And I think you don't know what data you might want or need in the future, right? Something I think we're seeing with like machine learning capabilities is training data is paramount. And if we had known what training data we had needed today, we probably would have started collecting it 2 years ago. So like, I think that's what like kind of the main reasons why like we'll start there. I also think kind of traditional BI is going to become less and less important because you're going to be able to get like personalized reporting through kind of chatbot.
Just for the audience sake, can you just give an example of what traditional business intelligence report would look like?
Yeah, so like people's dashboarding, right? So if they wanted a dashboard on the cash flow of their projects, right, that would be a traditional business intelligence report. Or they might have a dashboard that measures the performance of like PPC, right, takt time, etc. Like that would be a pretty traditional business intelligence type problem.
Right. So let's say you go through, we're going to go the non-boring way. We're going to go the exciting way and just pick one. And no surprise, let's say we pick Google. That's where you're going to store your data. And so you've made that decision. You build your lake. Where do you go next with it? And let's in this hypothetical kind of like as well as walking people through just the technical pieces of it, how do you start to like gather people's support and start kind of building out, this is what we're going to do, and pitch people on it, and that whole side of things?
Yeah, I think another reason why I would start here is I don't actually think you need a ton of buy-in for these types of technical decisions. I think you just make good technical decisions because this is your foundation that everything else sits on, and no one ever sees it. Right? This never gets exposed to the user, essentially. And if you build all of this out, you can get all of this in place and you can build all of this functionality and capability without ever really needing to like interview a user or map a process. I think, you would build out some capabilities around what you can do with copilots, right? Multimodal models these days, like Gemini, it's incredible what it can do with data, right? And it can basically give users kind of SME and software engineering superpowers, even if they're not software engineers or SMEs in the thing that they're working on. I think it opens the door to things like ontologies and knowledge graphs, where you can start thinking about your data with relational connections rather than like hierarchical ones. And if you start capturing that knowledge in these kind of graph-based systems, I honestly think you can map out most of construction in a kind of knowledge graph, and then like all of your data is much more powerful and relational. So I think that's another kind of key tenet. That I think you just want the capability to be able to do that, independent of what a user might want as their workflow or their UX.
Yeah, and for people out there who maybe didn't pick up all of those keywords and lingos, could you just provide potentially one example of that type of knowledge graph oncology type thing to help kind of people frame it up of like, all right, what is Matt talking about here?
Yeah, like Amazon is essentially one massive knowledge graph, right? Amazon's mapped out the relationships between products, so that if you search wrench, it knows what a wrench is, but it also knows all of the things that are related to wrenches and what wrenches might be used for. And so you've now got a relational set of information between your data, rather than a kind of hierarchical system, where you'd be able to kind of say, you have a toolbox, you have a wrench is used for bolts, things like that. So it just opens up a whole bunch of ways to like document knowledge that you can then recall later, or at least a machine can recall it later. Google search is a massive knowledge graph essentially as well.
Awesome. Is there any sorts of knowledge graphs that you're excited about that you would go to first when you got your data lake up, got things rolling? What are your kind of first steps in terms of, I'll call them products or features or capabilities that you would unleash out to your construction teams?
I think another kind of fundamental thing you would need to put in place here would be what's going to be your approach to APIs and microservices, and probably some sort of low code, no code platform. I think you want to have the ability to model data and model processes kind of quickly and easily and by the user, rather than like the user having to talk to someone doing a value stream map, and in that value stream map having to write functional specifications, and then there's functional specifications being measured against either existing tools or build your own tools. I think you want to put that power in your users' hands. I think it's going to enable you to move quicker. So I actually think that's where I would start there as well, is kind of, an API / microservice layer and like a no code type tool to really empower the users to build what they need and to build it without having to be a software engineer.
Matt, do you realize that what you're talking about right now is black magic to most people who listen to this, or people who are in the industry right now? Most people have grown up with, we do requirements engineering on the big thing we build, so we must do requirements engineering on the systems we use to do the big thing. And what you're essentially saying here is there's another religion, and in this religion there is a God.
Yeah, I do think you do need an element of that. Like, I do believe that you should pick a platform, right? And you might need to pick a couple. And I do think you should limit the number of surfaces and UIs that you expose your users to. Like, I do think that we're at a point now where the kind of, quite frankly, the weak link in the chain is the user. And so we actually need to make their day-to-day life simpler and more straightforward, and kind of more holistic, and less like fractured, right? I think, I've seen some systems these days where users have to log into like 50 tools to get their day job done. And every single one of them has their own UI, and every single one of them has kind of overlap and functionality, and all of them are being customized a little bit. And so you have to get like so much specialized knowledge to be able to do that. And I think you want to enable users to have generalized knowledge so they can like plug and play. So like for the requirements engineering, I would more kind of step back on that and say, what are the big building blocks you need? Like, do you want a PLM system, a product lifecycle management system? Do you want a CRM system? And if you do want a CRM system, what is that CRM going to do for you conceptually, and what is going to be like the rough scope bounds of your CRM? Do you want a GIS? Like, I happen to think that geographical information systems are going to be really, really important going forward, because I think like geospatial information about your data is a really intuitive way to understand it. And I think most people in construction think about where something is as one of our primary kind of anchors. So,
why do you think the paper 2D drawings never left? It's because it shows you exactly where something is, and it's very quick to go find it.
Yep. And so I think once you've kind of got those major building blocks, then you're probably looking at what platforms meet as much of those building blocks as possible, so that I can get this kind of simplified user experience. So I can kind of say, hey, for these 10 things, or even 12 things or 20 things, the user goes to Autodesk Construction Cloud and they kind of live there. And I would also advocate that you just try and use these platforms out of the box and uncustomized. Every time.
But Matt, I gotta have my little special feature.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Pareto principle. Right, 80% of the outcomes are in 20% of the stuff. Usually, these platforms are pretty good at getting that 20%, like good enough, right enough. And I think there's a whole bunch of other benefits of sticking with how it's been built, because now it's that vendor's problem to make sure it evolves, it's maintained, it's up. Right, you've got all this leverage against them. I think your users are now able to like come from a different company and come use your tooling, and it works the same way that they're used to. I think it enables you to not have to train people. Like, you send them to the training provided by the company that provides the platform, rather than you having to build all your own training material and constantly check that everyone's being trained on your super special way of doing something.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it before, but maintenance as well. Like, that little feature thingy that you created, every time they release a new version, you're probably paying to then make sure your little thing works with their little thing. And if it's just out of the box, you just that whole thing doesn't exist.
Yeah, and really your maintenance is your kind of database, API, microservice type layer, right? And you've got capabilities now because the tools are talking to your data lake versus trying to talk to each other. Like you can actually make a different decision about some of your major tooling and some of your major platforms easier than if you were just like all in on Primavera, which a lot of companies do, right? You get stuck in Primavera. No offense to anyone that's a massive Primavera fan.
There's many out there, so watch out.
So what you're talking about here is, I'm thinking at a user level now. You're reducing what I'd call the last pinprick of capability. So that one user wants that one graph that's very special to them. You're reducing that, and at the same time, massively reducing the costs associated with training bespokeness. You're also reducing fragility of the system because you're not asking them to do complex integrations on changes, etc. This sounds like a system that you could spin up relatively fast. Honest question, why don't more people do it like this? Because we all know that this is contrarian.
I think like there's a lot of dogma around the construction industry, right? And some of that dogma is good and some of it's not helpful as we go forward. I think this is a kind of area that's changing and growing really quickly, and it can be difficult to keep up with if you're not kind of a data scientist or a massive nerd like me. And so, yeah, I can understand why it might seem like alien. I think also, like, you know, the big names, the Primaveras, the Autodesks, they have such a kind of stranglehold on all of this. And weirdly, my suggestion is to actually use one of those platforms as like your major front end. But I think people view this problem as a front end problem. And really, I think your strategy should be about what the back end looks like. And as construction professionals, we're really not asked to think about that too much.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've talked about some of these big platforms, but I feel like there's a world of data out there that they're actually not covering, exposing, getting into. What are some of those different avenues that you're seeing now kind of being more on the front end, bleeding edge of this kind of data-driven construction programs that people should be keeping an eye out for and potentially looking to ingest in the future?
I believe that visual data is going to be the primary data type in construction relatively soon. Most things you do in construction require some sort of visual verification of it. Right? An awful lot of quality checks are visual in nature. Progress measurement, an awful lot of that is like visual in nature. And so, I think rather than like pulling up a checklist and clicking checklist buttons or filling out a form, I think you'll take a photograph or you'll shoot a quick video, or your phone has a LiDAR on it, and so you'll quickly grab a point cloud. And I think that's how we're going to document job sites. Because also behind the scenes there's growing capabilities of how that information can get processed without having to put human eyes on it. Like we talked a little bit about like Gemini and tools like that are multimodal. So Gemini can understand images just as well as it understands text. So if you have Gemini looking at like your entire photo library, it can recall images from your photo library just for you doing a natural language search. Like, hey, show me photographs that are outdoors of generators in Northern Virginia. And it will call you up all of the photographs related to that. And you won't have had to have done anything. Like the user submitting those photographs won't have had to add thousands of metadata tags to be able to do that retrieval. So I think that's really for me, that and GIS, I think, are the two like things that have become more important. Many parts of construction do GIS really, really well. I don't think your kind of average construction company thinks about GIS too much.
So let's say you're collecting a lot of data that you don't exactly know how it will be used in the future, but I completely agree. You collect it and stick it in the lake, and it's a problem for down the road. And let's say, because you're the head of digital for this construction company, you've implemented this process, it's gone fantastically well. Everyone's getting the information they need at the point of surface. And the CEO comes to you and says, "Cool, what's next?" What would you say?
What's next after this? I might actually go back to the knowledge graph and ontology thing. I do think it's like not that far away where you would be able to have a knowledge graph that like maps out again the Pareto principle, like a big chunk of what like a building or construction is. Because most of what we do, right, we're actually knowledge workers, and like we're hired because we've got knowledge about things. And a knowledge graph really helps you take that knowledge out of our brains and put it in a structure that a machine can understand. And now machines can start to do some of the things that we do, right? I often joke, right? Sequencing with scheduling is just kind of knowing that the roof goes on after the walls go up, right? If that's in a knowledge graph, a machine can dictate that piece of logic and sequencing for us. I don't need to tell P6 that the roof goes on after the walls go up. And I think like the more and more of that knowledge you capture, like we've got some amazing quality inspectors in the industry, but a lot of like the definition of what good quality is in their brains, or it's in some 300-page SOP. Having that in an ontology, you can now like do all kinds of things with incoming data and automatically checking that data or automatically generating data based on that ontology. So that's my prediction of where I think things might go even further here. Also, those knowledge graphs and ontologies will help you make sense of your data, right? If you take a photograph in Google Lens, it's essentially using a knowledge graph behind the scene called Google Product Search to tell you that that image you've taken is of an electrical outlet, and that electrical outlet is made by Legrand, and it's got this serial number, and you can buy it from this store, and here's the spec sheet for it. Like all of that stuff is all like a relational knowledge graph.
I'm personally really, really excited about taking the Gantt charts, which is by definition a knowledge graph in itself, and actually expanding those out. And just to clarify, starting at a Gantt chart doesn't mean that the Gantt chart's the center of a knowledge graph. There's no such thing as a center of a knowledge graph. But what that does is show the relationship between activities. And then what you could do is do relationship with the scope of work and the BIM models, which is happening now. But then on the other side, you could do relationship with resourcing and people and understand productivity rates a lot better. And if you do it with GIS data, then you can do site movements. And ultimately, the entirety of a construction endeavor to me is a giant knowledge graph, which then can be properly learnt against and replicated. Obvious question. Let's say that this is wildly successful. Should this construction company that you're the head of digital, should people be worried about finding a new job?
I think jobs will just evolve. So a kind of current buzzword is prompt engineering, right? Software engineers are going to become prompt engineers, right? They won't necessarily need to write code. They'll need to know how to prompt a machine how to write code, right? Because how you prompt them really, really matters in terms of what the outcome is. Like if you look on OpenAI's website, they've got an entire thing on prompt engineering, and they've even got a bunch of APIs for prompt engineering. So I think you'll just see something similar in our realms where the knowledge workers like ourselves, we will become really good at prompting, whatever it is, a co-pilot to give us what it is we need at the time that we need it. And it will just shorten that cycle of, hey, I need to know this thing. When do I have that thing? Like, as you'll know, you'll ask for something and someone will tell you, oh, I can get you that next week. Well, we're going to do it.
It's always next week.
Yeah, we're going to do a ton of construction between now and next week. So like, I'm diminishing my ability to have impact, because the quicker I can make decisions, the quicker I can intersect something that's not going in the right direction, the quicker I can turn it to something good. So that would be my guess as to what's going to kind of happen there.
I think you're going to see that
there's
also.
a massive shortage anyway. So like,
yeah, we've got a big shortage.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just was going to say, I think people will learn to ask for things they need. And then once they figure out how to ask regularly, they'll figure out how to automate. It's kind of like, oh, hey, going back to your Amazon, I need to buy a wrench. Oh, I can have a wrench delivered to me every 2 months. Now, that's a terrible analogy, because why would you need a wrench every 2 months? But I think you get the point where once that behavior starts of being able to ask and prompt really well, people, I think, will naturally really get into the automation side of it. Then I think that's where we're going to see huge, huge, huge benefits, because it'll be, oh, show me my labor, that was on site in the generator room every single Monday at 8 a.m. And if it's outside of these levels, send the notice to adjust like these sorts of factors, and it's completely automated versus, 6 OAC meetings and 5 calls later and 3 more chase the emails. It'll just be bing, bang, boom.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I recommend like having some sort of low code, no code API microservice layer is really important to help you do that automation and help the users create a automation rather than having to request it from an army of software engineers. I think that's also connected to, like I mentioned, like dogma within the industry. I think one of the forms of dogma in the industry is that like construction's a one-off problem. Like, I'm never going to build that thing again. So why over optimize the delivery of that thing? And that may well be true, but this opens the door for that automation to still be valuable, even if you only use it a few times, because it was so cheap to create.
Yeah.
But then I think you'll also find, well, the next project isn't actually that different from the first project. And some of what I automated last time, I can now build on that with additional automation this time.
Yeah. I think you brought it up before in some of our previous conversations about having a bit of project management, but when you go deliver projects, you also have to be good at operations management. And the process of creating a schedule or creating a plan, the process is the same. Like, you'll need to gather scope, build requirements, add activities. And yeah, maybe it changes slightly in like what activities you put in the schedule, but the process stays the same. And that's where that sort of automation that we're talking about is going to be absolutely key. Yeah. Well, Matt, we're about up at time. Any final thoughts on digitization before we jump?
I just recommend people kind of engage in what's possible in the data sciences these days. I don't have a data science background. I'm just a nerd and I'm curious. But I've learned a ton of what's possible, and it's really changed how I think about like project problems in construction. I always used to think in hierarchical terms. Right? I'm used to using Uniformat 2 and a hierarchical cost coding structure. Well, it wasn't until I really understood kind of metadata, like this idea of having data about your data, that I started to not think in hierarchical terms, which opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for less complexity, more agility, and for my data to be modeled and changed much more quickly. So I think that would be like my recommendation. I think maybe connected to that is also like understand what's going on at these kind of back-end layers with kind of cloud tooling. So many of these tools are so user-friendly. You don't need to know hardly anything about computer science.
Absolutely unbelievable. I always tell people, they ask me, what course should I take? What certification should I do? Think of a problem, roll your sleeves up, open up ChatGPT or Bard, and go get dirty. Go create something, go build something. I'll link it in the show notes. I created a construction program with 5,000 fake projects in it. It is very easy to go use these tools. Well, folks, thank you for coming in and listening to us this week. Matt, really appreciate you joining and sharing all the knowledge you have on knowledge graphs, pun intended. Before we take off for the week, if you could do me one favor, please share this show with somebody who you know would value it. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple. The more you share, the more value you can bring. So for us Beyond Deadlines, have a great week.